Welcome back to another episode of the Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means for you. This week, I'm joined by Coach Sam, and we're going to talk about life after having a baby. This is kind of a follow-up podcast because do you remember what episode that was?
No, I'll have to put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. But we did an episode where we talked, you were still pregnant and everybody was saying you should redo this afterwards. And now, Teddy just turned 1. So we wanted to cover a lot of things, whether it's expectations or training, or just kind of your mindset around a lot of these different things. And we coach a lot of moms or a lot of expecting mothers. So this is going to be a really, really good insight. And of course, this is your experience. This is not what everybody else is going to experience, but I'm really excited to dive into these different topics.
Yeah, that was the number one thing people said in response to, I think we did a productivity and organization podcast, which are 2 of my passions in life. And everyone was like, you're going to have to re-record this after you have a baby, because a lot of these things aren't going to work for you. And I think when you're pregnant, you have this oh, not me mindset, or at least a lot of people do. And I thought, yeah, but I'll be able to do most of this, but I did have to change a lot of things. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, is the way that I have adjusted to my reality since having Teddy.
Yeah. And I think that it's just, like anything, and this is the most extreme example, but there's so many times where we think that we know what's going to be happening, but then when it actually is occurring, when it's out of our control, it's completely different, right? So you can prep and plan as much as you want, but then when you actually are in the middle of it, it's often going to look different. And especially when we're talking about a child who, who's changing every single day, and they are 100% dependent on you. So this is going to be so different than anything else. So yeah, I think a lot of people setting expectations for yourself and how you want to live, as kind of a general ethos is really important. How do you want to parent? How do you want to do these things? But then the day-to-day stuff is going to be very different, you've experienced. So let's get into that.
Yeah. Well, that's actually my first one too, is adjusting my expectations, because there were a lot of things that I expected I would be able to do, or that I would want to do postpartum that it didn't happen. First thing was I had a pretty significant birth trauma for myself. And so I was actually not on bed rest, but I was on chair rest for the first 2 weeks postpartum. I wasn't allowed to get up. I had to have a small procedure at the 2-week mark. And then after a couple of days, I was able to get up and move around, but I thought I'd be able to go for walks. I'd be able to get some fresh air. And I couldn't do any of that, which made the whole postpartum period a lot harder for me mentally, because I'm an active person. So that was really tough. And then that kind of carried on, and I had to recognize right off the bat that, okay, things are going to look like you wanted them to. And same thing with how productive I wanted to be. I thought he'll be able to nap, I'll be able to work, all of this stuff. I had a tongue-tied baby, which I'm not going to go into what all that means, but I can put this in the show notes too. I actually just recorded a podcast with someone else on what that means and how that affected him growing up. But it made him sleep very hard. It made eating very hard. It made him very, very fussy. So I didn't get those naps. I didn't get that time. And so right off the bat, that had to change too. I didn't get the time to be productive that I wanted. And so I had to adjust what productive meant to me. And so all of those things, going into it, I feel like if I were to give advice on this, I would say to just scrap your expectations. And I heard somebody say the other day, they're like, if something is important to you, you're going to make time for it. As a new mom. So I plan on working out as much as I can when I have a baby. And I think that's true. But I also think that having certain parameters and boundaries around those things is really helpful. And so for me, even now, with a 1-year-old who was up for 5 hours straight last night, I have to have boundaries around when I'm going to hold myself to my expectations. So for me, I want to train 4 days a week. That's one of my goals. And I want to get in a certain number of steps per day, unless I get less than 5 hours of sleep. if I wake up and I've gotten less than 5 hours of sleep, or my aura ring is less than 70, I will somewhat negotiate with myself and say, okay, like I know you expected to work out this morning. Last night did not go as you had planned or hoped. Do you feel capable to get up at 5 a.m. and work out? Or would sleeping the extra hour or hour and a half be more beneficial for you in the long run? And that's where I have to like be honest with myself, because sometimes there are times where it's like, an hour and a half extra sleep probably isn't going to do much for me. I'd rather get up and move. But then there are times where that actually would be a lot more helpful. A workout would not be beneficial, would not be productive, probably would like actually make things worse. So having that boundary around that was really, really helpful. But and not putting that pressure on myself to be like, hey, if you want it, make time for it. Of course I want it, but I also want my kid to sleep, and I don't have control of that. So adjusting those expectations of what productive looks like, what being adherent or disciplined looks like, because it's not up to you anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's really different, because you made a great point there where you said, okay, like I have to make that distinction of like, is this actually going to help me or is this going to hurt me? So it's not like you're saying like, I'm just letting myself off the hook because, oh, Teddy didn't sleep well for the past week, so that means I didn't do anything. Like, you're not saying that at all. You're not just saying you're completely ignoring your goals that you've set for yourself. You're saying that you're actually listening to, you're in tune with your body. All right, you know what, like this extra hour, like probably isn't going to make a difference. Let me just go train. Or you wake up and you're like, I am totally trashed. Like, I need to maybe just go for a walk later when I can figure it out. Right. Like that's when you have to actually be in tune with yourself. And so you're not like just letting yourself off the hook, but you're also just not like going into a wall for no reason, because again, it's not just about you now. It's like, okay, hey, if I wake up and I didn't sleep, like for me, it's like, okay, I didn't sleep and I got all this shit to do today, right? Like, okay, just got to get up, got to do it. I'm tired. I can slam some caffeine. I can do this. I can do that. Nobody is, I mean, people are holding me, like I'm accountable to other people, right? But I'm not accountable to a 1-year-old who needs all of my attention, right? So it's very different. So I think that I understand again where that person is coming from, right? Because it's like, you do make time for things that are important for you. And, sometimes it means you have to get up early or stay up late or whatever. But again, being able to navigate, and really it comes back to the crux of everything that we talk about, like being flexible with your mindset. And this goes for all of your habits, like food, training, just your expectations of what you can give. And like, that's really what a flexible mindset is about. Not saying like, oh, I couldn't go today, so that means I'm not going to train at all this week. No, you're like, I'm just not going to train today. Maybe I go do something active later with him if we can. And then I will, the tomorrow will be a new day. And it probably, this probably won't happen again, hopefully. Right. And again, if it does, that's when you adjust things. And so it's just a little bit, I think, having that flexible mindset around your expectations. And I really like what you talked about with having like the weekly goals. I think that's something that a lot of people would probably really, really benefit from, especially stuff like 4 days of training, right? Like you can have that over the course of multiple days. And for clients who do struggle to actually get to the gym, I will typically say, hey, no, like let's plan the days. But again, those are for people who are in a situation where they can do that. They don't have a infant. So outside of those situations, sometimes it is important to plan the exact day and the exact time. Other times it's better to say, no, I'm going to do this over the week. And then based on my schedule, I'm going to adjust. So I really, really like that. And I think that for anybody who's probably struggling with like, a new child, like first few years, like it's going to be really, really rough and really dependent on their schedule. That might be a much better tool to use.
Yeah. And that is exactly what I used to do when, especially when I was competing. It was like, you have so much cardio, so much training to do. I was doing Orange Theory at the time because I worked at Orange Theory. So I would schedule out, okay, Monday, I'm going to do this much cardio and this lift. And then Tuesday, I'm going to do Orange Theory. Wednesday, it was very scheduled to make sure I got it all in. And I would adhere to that, because if I didn't, then I have to play catch up. And now, like, I don't need to do that, even though I was used to doing that. It is just like that mindset shift of like, okay, I know that's what you used to do, but that's not helpful, because if he doesn't sleep on Monday, but then he sleeps on Tuesday, well, then maybe you could have gotten that workout in on Tuesday. And that kind of lends to my next point, is learning to have patience with the season of life. And we talk a lot about that with our clients, and we have a podcast on adjusting to your season. But when you're in the heat of things, and when you are, especially in those early days, and not for everybody, but for me, it was so hard. Like I'm talking like I would get 6 hours of sleep over the course of like 6 days. Like it was so brutal. And there was no training to be had. I was injured, and I was exhausted, and I was emotionally drained. There was no training, and I wanted it so bad. I was like, I want to get back to being me. I want to get back to doing the things that I want to do. I want to get back to feeling like myself again. And it felt like that would never happen. And then it does. And it's maybe not as quickly as you want it to be. And it's maybe not in the way that you want it to be, but it does happen. And everything passes, even when you don't think it will. And I know that sounds stupid. Like, of course it passes. Like, time always passes. But at least, again, for me, in the heat of it at 3 a.m., when all I want to do is go to sleep, all I want to do is close my eyes. And I haven't closed my eyes in 2 days. It's like, this is never going to end. And then it does. And then like this little part of you almost wants that back because you wanted it to be over so badly. And you have the rest of your life to train. At least, hopefully you have the rest of your life to train. You only have this amount of time to be in this situation. And so even though it's okay to want it to be over, I wouldn't go back there if I had the choice. Like, I really wouldn't. It was so brutal, but it does pass. And like it goes back to the adjusting the expectations a little bit, but just having that patience to know that I know you want to train. I know you want to get right back at it, but it will happen. And rushing it not only can be that, I don't know how to best to say it, but like that kind of mind action gap where you're trying to make it happen and it can't happen. And so then you're frustrated because it's not happening. Mm-hmm. If it's not realistic, don't set that expectation right now. And it's probably not realistic in that situation. Not only can it have that mental game with you, but it can also really negatively impact your body, because your body may feel ready to go. You may feel like, yeah, I can lift, I can do whatever, but there's so much going on internally with your core, with your pelvic floor, that you don't recognize how much those parts of your body are engaged in literally everything you do until they're not at their peak, or they're not in their normal state. And so pushing it and lifting too soon, or running too soon, or doing anything too soon can really have negative impacts on you. And so again, having that patience to know, I know I want to do these things, but I got to give my body a second. Even if you have a perfect labor, you got to give your body a second. And that's why there is that window. And everybody's different. I could not have lifted earlier than I did, because I would have really messed myself up. Some people can lift a little sooner. And I think it is a little arbitrary to have like an 8-week cutoff. Like, you can't do anything and then at 8 weeks, go do whatever you want to do. But
it doesn't make much sense.
What?
That doesn't make much sense. It's like, I feel like there should be like a way that we gradually ease into this.
There should be. And that's what I do work with a lot of my postpartum clients on, is starting off with some core rehab, some pelvic floor work. Then we get into a little bit of body weight stuff. Then we get into a little bit of band work. Then we can start getting into gradual lifting. And then over time, getting back to where you were, while keeping in a lot of those pieces from the initial postpartum, just kind of scaling that up as we go. But if you don't do that, if you just jump right back into it, which is kind of what I eventually did, because I was so restricted right away that when it came time for me to actually go back into it, I was just like, hit the ground running, let's go. And that has kind of messed me up a little bit. It's again, it's just not appropriate. So having that gradual approach and having that patience to know that you got to build up to it will just help you out in the long run.
I think too, that mindset of, and this goes not just for, postpartum period or just having a baby, but the idea of, I want to be back in this place. And sometimes that place is never going to exist again, right? And this is a great example. Like, your life before having Teddy does not exist anymore. You have those memories that shaped you. Those were great experiences. That is not your life. Longing for that to be your life is only going to make your current life worse. And we see this in so many situations, whether it's, having a baby, or like a relationship ending, or just entering kind of a different season of life where, something maybe really catastrophic happened, whatever it is. And, this happens a lot to older people, right? And I'm experiencing this right now with my grandma, unfortunately. And it's like her old life is no longer there because of certain things that have happened. And as much as she wants to go back to that, it doesn't matter because it's not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And her not being able to get past that is only really holding her back and making her sad, upset, frustrated, despondent, all these things. So if somebody's in that situation, for what we're talking about, again, a year postpartum, right? Like thinking about your life before, you can appreciate aspects of what your life was before. But if you're trying to go back to that, it's just not ever going to be that way again. Like you can't do that. So I think that it's important to make that shift and say, wow, I loved my life before. I had all these great experiences, but this is my life now. How can I make this my best life with where I'm at? And I think a lot of people get stuck in that past thinking, and they're never able to move forward because of that like expectation, like not meeting the reality. And that is such a crucial thing for, again, not just this talk, but really for anything. But especially when we're talking about this, because again, it is so different. It's not just like, I mean, this is such a large scale change, right? So I think it's a complete different life. Like it's obviously you're still Sam, you're still you, like you still have, your relationships and like all of that, but it's just a very different life. So I don't want to say you're a different person, you just have a different life.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I'm a different person. It's a different life, different person, a different everything. And again, you don't recognize that when you get pregnant. You just get pregnant and you're still you, but you're pregnant. And there's no understanding how it's going to change your life until it does. And like, I love the way you said that and there's a book called The Power of Now that talks a lot about that. When you think of how this shouldn't be happening, or I wish it was this other way, or it shouldn't be like this. When you fight the way that things are, you're only creating pain for yourself. And the more you can accept that, okay, this is where I am, this is my reality, what am I going to do with it now? You take away so much of that pain and that suffering, because there's no need to suffer. There's always going to be pain, but there's no need to suffer. And so, yeah, that's a huge part of it. And that's a hard thing to do. And that was the first, like, I don't know, 2 weeks, my husband and I would just lay in bed and be like, I miss you. I miss our dogs. Like, I miss our old life, because we didn't get to spend time with each other anymore. It was either he was with him or I was with him. And it's just, and that's a thing that I think a lot of people are ashamed to say, but your life changes overnight. And if you're feeling that way, you're not alone. Everybody has had that thought, like at least to some degree, but we're taught, I can't imagine my life without you or before you. Oh, I can imagine my life before you. I remember my life before you. Would I want that? Would I trade you for that? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But I can remember what it was like to sleep in. I can remember what it was like to just pick up and go for a 14-hour road trip with my husband. I remember what that was like. Now it's like, okay, we're going to Target.
Oh, don't catch me doing that.
Let me
plan.
Not. Yeah.
Bro, 14-hour road trip. Where are you going?
Oh, anywhere. We're from the Midwest.
Just fly. Like what? Like I don't understand.
It's only 14 hours. It's fine.
Like 7 is like my like, and that's pushing it. You know what I mean?
We can do 14 in a day.
I can do it. It's not that I can't do it, but it's like, do I want to do this?
Fair. I mean, I don't want to do it anymore, but back in our prime,
my hips are just like, no. No.
Hard stop.
Also, I am just like so like gotta move around. You know how I am. The idea of like being at least in like a plane, even if it's a long flight, like I'm still moving, like I'm doing stuff on the flight. I'm drinking 87 drinks, so I gotta go to the bathroom every 30 minutes, and then I'm like taking, I'm that person. If I'm just like walking around, like I will be active and get up and do stuff. So even though you're like in a tube going somewhere for a long time, like it's still different. Like
yeah, it is different. It is very different.
And you can also work on plane. I can at least like pretty effectively. Working in the car, I'll do it because I have to, but shit's falling on your lap and like I'm getting car sick and like it's just it's a whole thing.
No,
So
I
I would
turned
rather
like
fly again to Singapore for 15 hours than be in a 14-hour car ride, like straight up.
at this point in time, I would. Back in the day, I would like have we loved our road trips. We would just, even now, Tom will like propose.
It's like a fun
like,
experience
no,
for you guys, but
yes, we used to love to do that, and we lived 22 hours away from our family, so it was like we'd drive back with our dog a couple times a year, so we got too used to it. But yeah, not doing that now, not at all. And that's a thing to accept. And we haven't really even traveled much with Teddy just because, well, COVID, I mean, the travel was difficult, and didn't really want to expose him to anything when he was little. Now he just gets us all sick. So sorry to everybody listening to me. I know I sound like I'm a 12-pack a day smoker. I promise I'm not.
Sam is also now a chain smoker after having a baby. We didn't want to tell you guys. We've been, keeping it under wraps, but
if you're watching the podcast,
adjusting my perspective, I'm now into this.
Hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. No, but it just isn't gonna happen. We're not gonna take any road trips, but we'll travel again someday. But again, I'm not gonna fight. And I've had moments like that where I'm like, I just want to go somewhere, and I'm like, you will again, but your kid will never be one again. So like, chill out, be in the now, be with him. And again, those thoughts will come. It's what you do with the thoughts. I could sit there and ruminate on it and say, like, but I want to go, but I want to go, but I want to go. It's like, you get to go. You go see Lauren for a couple days every so many months. Like, you get to go. I went on a bachelorette trip, like these little tiny trips that maybe they're not like the week off that I want. Like, I love a week off, but I'll take 2 days away, and that makes it easier on me and him. But I'll get to do that again someday. And I don't want to rush that because I don't want him to not need me, because I know that day is coming and I'm not ready.
Yeah, right. I've even just like, even for myself, like I've changed my thoughts around travel too, right? Like, this is again completely unrelated, but I'm somebody who likes things to be different. I need different stimulation all the time. So different places, people, things. Mm-hmm. So for me, like, I like going and doing things, but again, like, it is like, as much as I do travel and I have it nailed down and I can work anywhere under any circumstance, it's still, of course, it can be a challenge. So like, I found though that like by doing small things, and like that actually really does like make me happier, even if it's like a day or two going somewhere, you know what I mean? And like, or making, if I have to go somewhere for a trip, it's like, okay, maybe I can't experience and explore this place for however long, right? But maybe I can do this for half of a day and then just get like a later flight. So I think too, just so many things about this, like adjusting your expectations to be like, I could say the same thing. Oh, I would love a week-long vacation where I don't do this. And it's just not the reality for my life currently. In the season of life with business, it's just not a possibility. But am I in a city for an event that I like and I can now get a later flight and spend a few hours somewhere? Yeah, I can still do that. So I don't have to say, oh, I'm missing out completely. I just have to adjust that expectation of like, hey, let me like enjoy this, or let me go do that. Or let me tack this on. Like, those are the kinds of things. And I think a lot of people just in general, whether it's, with kids or not, they're always like longing for this thing, but it's like, why can't you just create that in a smaller sense? And you might actually be really fulfilled with that. Obviously a week-long vacation, gallivanting across Europe is a lot different than staying half of a day in a city. But it's like, that also is like, you don't need that necessarily. You might not need all of that, is what I'm saying, to get the experience that like you're desiring. So sometimes it is about just changing that expectation of like, let me just have the most fun in these few hours that I have somewhere, and like that will rejuvenate me and like be a great experience. Sorry, I keep derailing us, but
no, it's okay. I think that's well, that relates to more people listening, because I think everybody has that thing where it's like, if only I could do this. And it's like, well, maybe you can't do that, but you can. And we talk about this all the time, that something is better than nothing, and recognizing that. But it's so easy to get caught in that. Well, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all. If it can't be exactly as I want it to be, then it's not good enough. It's not. And when you fall into that trap of, it's got to be this, or I have to achieve this, or I have to be doing this, when you fall into that trap, you're never going to be happy.
No, ever.
I think it's important. But the other thing I learned over the past year, and this was the hardest lesson and one that I continue to have to learn every day. Like, again, last night, Teddy was sick and we were up from 10:45 until 4 a.m. And I'm laying there going, just watching the clock go. I'm only going to get 4 hours of sleep if I fall asleep now. I'm only going to get 3 hours of sleep if he falls asleep now. And you just want to have a little bit of control. But when your life isn't your own anymore, you're not in control anymore. And so probably the biggest lesson, and the one that I continue to learn, is learning to let go. And on that podcast, we talked about routine and productivity. I talked about how I'm a very routine person, always have been. I mean, humans in general, we're creatures of habit. And my habit is being routine. I'm being in a routine. And so I used to use a planner that had, by the half hour, I would schedule out my day, list everything out. I had very planned long time in advance. My workouts were scheduled as well. And that just can't happen anymore because my days don't look the same. And even if I have a week where I think everything's going to be, perfect, he's going to go to daycare, inevitably he'll get sick, he'll be home. Something just seems to always happen. So what I have done is I've actually, and this is a more practical tip, I suppose, I've gotten rid of my traditional planner. I use my calendar on my phone to keep track of things that are coming from the future, which I find actually I used to not be able to do, but now it's almost more convenient because I always have my phone with me. I can set alarms for those things because my brain is in 7,000 places all the time now. And it helps me to have those reminders. And then I use it's like a desktop calendar. If you're watching the YouTube, I'll show you. I have it right here, but it's just this desktop planner that has the days of the week and a to-do list for the whole week. And it also has a habit tracker at the bottom, which I really like. I haven't used yet because I use my own habit tracker, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But I'm able to schedule out everything I have going on for the week on there, and then my to-do list for the week on there. And then I have a daily little checklist where then I put those things on the daily checklist when I get to that day. So I know what I need to get done through the course of the week. It's there, I can see it. And then I plan it day of based on what I can think the day is going to look like, based on what the night looked like, based on if he's sick or not, based on what appointments we have going on. And then instead of timing things out by the half hour like I would do before, I time block. So during his first nap, let's say he's home all day. He usually goes to daycare half days, but if he's home all day, like he is on Thursdays, I will say, first nap, I'm going to get these things done. Second nap, I'm going to try to get these things done. Not at 10:30, I'm going to do X. It's just in this time period, I'm going to get this done. And then I even do that when he's at daycare now. I'll do my first work block for an hour. I'm going to try to tackle these tasks, and then I'll eat lunch or go for a short walk. And then I'll do another work block and I'll try to get these things done. And I used to not be able to do that because it wasn't structured enough for me, because I really do need a high amount of structure to remain focused and remain productive. But now that I can't do that, I just physically can't do that, this is the next best thing. And it's worked out for me a lot better than trying to hold myself again to that standard of this is what I want to get done, and then not being able to do it on my timeline, and then being pissed that I couldn't get it done on my timeline, and then not getting it done at all. So rather than being stuck to a timeline, I just got that flexible mindset of, okay, maybe it's not going to happen at 10:30, but it will happen sometime today.
Yeah, I think the time block is really useful too, because then sometimes what ends up happening, and I'm not sure if you ever experienced this, maybe not, but sometimes we try to plan so much that we're just planning to plan, but we're not actually doing anything, right? And it feels very satisfying to have everything line by line out, but how much time are you spending doing that? So it's I always try to say all right, obviously there's going to be certain non-negotiables for a day. If you have an appointment or you need to drive somewhere or whatever, you have a call, there's certain things that are going to be non-negotiables that are set based on time, drop off Teddy, pick up Teddy, those things are pretty set. But then outside of that, saying okay, what are the handful of things that I need to do today? And then choosing the blocks of time. Okay, I know that I'm much more productive during these times. Let me do this. or this. And that can go like, we all know, okay, what work do I need to get done? You know what I mean? And sometimes there's plenty of days where I'm doing work in a non-ideal time, right? Because it's just the way that it goes. But if we have our choice to pick, you know what I mean, in the beginning of the day, if like everything like, hey, let's choose to do this, I'm better at doing these tasks earlier, better at doing these tasks later, try to do that, see if it does help your productivity. But again, be flexible with it, because sometimes things are just going to come up, things are going to happen. And it's just one of those things that I think, again, just developing this flexible mindset is so important for food, training, all of our habits, and for productivity as well. Because I think a lot of people can get stuck in that behavior of like planning to plan. And I know I've done that a million times, you know what I mean? Like, let me just set, oh, this isn't good enough, let me redo it. And it's like, how much time did I just waste doing this? Instead of saying, okay, here are my non-negotiables for the week. Here's what I want to get done over this period of time. Let me get it done now. And I, obviously, again, if there's a deadline or there's a call or there's an appointment, like those things have to be planned. But everything else around it is how you can end up structuring it. So I think that's a really good point. And I think so many people can get really caught up with that. And then they become less like, there's the range is no structure at all, which is super overwhelming. And then there's too much structure to where you're just kind of stifled to do anything, and then you kind of start to resent that. And then if that time goes by and you didn't get it done, you're like, oh, whatever, I didn't get it done. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, well, I had this one meal that was off plan, so now let me continue to overeat for the next 3 days. It's literally the same thing, but for your schedule. And I've done that so many times. Like, oh, I didn't get this done when I thought, do I need to do that? Like, it just kind of snowballs, or you like spiral for no reason. It's like, just do it later.
And you get off on your timeline, and then it's like, how do I catch up on my timeline? And it can be very counterproductive, I would say.
Basically, it's you're counterproductive to what you're trying to be productive with.
Literally.
This could not be a worse situation.
And especially when you have things that pop up throughout your day, which we all do, and then you have like, that's the hardest thing for me in parenting will always be that like, my time is not my own. Like, I just don't have control of my schedule the way that I would like. But I will say that gives you a little bit more like of a backbone in certain circumstances, where like, otherwise I'd be like, oh yeah, I guess I can do whatever works. Where it's like, I have this time to this time, and I can start at this time and be done at this time. Like, I don't have I'm sorry, this is what I have to do. My kids' sleep is more important than, whatever appointment this is, like, because that then dictates how much sleep I get, and then what our days look like. So it does make me a little bit more assertive, I would say, because these things matter. But still, it's just a struggle.
Yeah, I have no concept of parenting, as you know very well. But the one thing that I always hear is that like the sleep schedule, like the nap and the sleep schedule, is like vital those first few years. And I'm sure as years go on as well, but obviously there's a lot more sleep happening. There's like not a lot of sleep happening, but also a lot of sleep happening when they're young, which is like so weird. Like this like strange dichotomy of just like you're up at weird times, but also you're sleeping a lot. Like what? So
that's the thing. It's like they're sleeping when you don't want them to sleep. And then they're like, at least for Teddy with his tongue tie, like he could only sleep like on his stomach on my chest. And so it was like, well, I'm not sleeping. So it's so fucked.
But
it's a trip.
Like I always just hear that though, like, okay, like go to bed at this time, wake up at this time, like do these things, and like as much as possible, you know what I mean? Because otherwise it's just like pure chaos.
Like, it can be. I think it really depends on the parent too, and what
the child.
And the child
probably going to be much more flexible than others, but
that's
one thing I just always hear: like stick with the sleep schedule, like find it, do it. Obviously, they're going to adjust as like they start changing, but like having that schedule is so.
It is very, very helpful. Very helpful. Yeah. Even Teddy, who like was, again, he was up crazy amount of time last night, he still went down for his nap at the same time. He always does, because he always does. It really doesn't matter anymore, because he's so in a routine of going down for his nap.
You're like, I don't know if he's gonna go down, and I was like, okay, like we can just move it, and then but sure enough.
He was out at 9:45, and I'm like, Okay, bro, I'm not gonna fight this. Go, please. Um, hopefully he does that this afternoon so I can take a nap with him. Um, but the last thing I was going to touch on was just the kind of like what we've been talking about this whole time. The overarching theme here is just adapting to your new reality. And for me, the biggest thing was adapting my goals to this new reality, because I'm a goal driven person, always have been. And I think a lot of people in this space are our competitors, athletes. We have like these big goals and these big expectations for ourselves. And while I still have goals, I still have expectations for myself, they look a lot different. And accepting that that doesn't make me lazy, or doesn't make me less successful or anything, to just say, hey, good is good enough right now. Again, expecting myself to be an elite athlete or to diet like I used to and train like I used to would just create so much like cognitive dissonance of what I want versus what I'm able to do. Like that pain would be so silly. And I have experienced it a little bit. Like from time to time, I'll be like, okay, yeah, like I want to get back in this. I want to push. I want to do this. And then I start doing it, and I'm like, I just don't care. And that's a huge thing to just recognize. And that's just me. I know there are a lot of people who would really care and would put in that time and would do whatever they have to do. For me, I would rather, again, get that extra hour of sleep, or if spend that hour with Teddy and Tom, or go for a walk instead of saying, hey, yeah, you guys just hang out. I'm going to do a workout on my own. And I really care more about creating healthy habits in myself that I can then model for him. Because with tracking for so long, I wouldn't say that I have had the best habits. I just did what I needed to do to hit my macros and to, adhere to this discipline and routine. And that has a time and a place. This isn't that anymore. And so I had to accept that my goals aren't what they once were. I'm not willing to do what I once was. And therefore I need to change what my expectations are for myself. Because if I'm not willing to do what I was once able to do, if I'm not willing or sometimes capable to have the discipline I once had, I can't expect myself to hit these certain goals. So sometimes you need to adjust your actions to reach the goal. Sometimes the goal needs to change. And for me in this circumstance, my goals needed to change. And not only does that come with then changing your actions, but it also comes with accepting what then that means. And for me, that means I don't look as lean as I once did. I don't look as fit as I once did. I'm not as fit as I once was. I could barely run 2 miles the other day. I was like gasping for breath. And that's still, I know that's still a decent amount. And I'm proud that I can run 2 miles, but I used to be able to do a lot more. I used to be able to do a lot of that a lot faster and with a lot less struggle. And I can't beat myself up for that, because I'm not willing to do the things that it would take for me to be where I once was. And that's just it.
And I think that's the most important part of it, because again, people have these expectations or this desire to have a previous life or a previous goal, but then their actions are not matching up, right? And if you wanted to be, there are plenty of people who are elite athletes who are also moms, if that is what they desire to do. Mm-hmm. But you have to recognize that if that's not what I desire to do, then my goals, like you said, have to change, and you have to be okay with that. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. Anytime a goal changes, you can't be like, well, I don't really want to do this, but I want that. Like, you really cannot have both things. Like, mm-hmm. You can't have your cake and eat it too in every situation. Mm-hmm. Like, you are still obviously incredibly fit, in great shape, look awesome, are a healthy person. But I know what you're saying. Like, there's a different level to that. You know mm-hmm. what I mean? And it's like recognizing what it would take to grow bigger shoulders, or to have whatever the goal is, right? Like, mm-hmm. I want bigger glutes. Okay, if I know I want bigger glutes, then I'm going to have to do X, Y, Z. Do I want to do all those things for months on end? I don't know, right? Like, if I do, then that's the work that I need to put in. If I don't want to take those actions, well, then I have to accept that I'm not going to have those glutes. And this is just a very silly kind of example, but it's a salient example that a lot of people actually, like, they'll say, I want this, but then they don't want to put in those actions. It's like, well, then you're not going to get that. So then you thinking, oh, I'm a disappointment, or I'm not good enough. No, you
Yeah.
didn't want to do that. So you have to accept that if you want this end goal, that these are the behaviors and the actions you need to take on a daily basis. And if you don't want to do that, you need to be accepting of that. And it's the same way whenever I decided, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to compete again. I might not. And right now, my life very much does not look like yours, but in the mindset of, I have much more of like a lifestyle, and I make certain choices, and I know that those choices have consequences, right? And I'm okay with certain consequences because that is the choice that I am making. So maybe I'm not as lean as I was, or as muscular as I once was, or this or that, but I am thriving in my own sense. And that is what we try to get across to clients so much. And I think so many people who have had very specific goals really struggle with that transition, right? Because that, for a lot of people, especially if we're talking about somebody who has competed or has been any kind of competitive athlete, that's like that identity, like, who am I without this? And that is a huge issue that people really struggle with, even if it's like, okay, I used to be a physique athlete, or I used to be a top D1 level athlete in college, or I used to just run marathons and that was super easy, and now obviously I have to put in this amount of miles for that to happen, and I can't do that because of all these other reasons, or I don't want to. Well, then you can't expect to have that same half marathon time. Like, it's just, so I think a lot of times it's just about being realistic with ourselves. And a lot of people don't necessarily want to have those conversations. They want to say, I can have all of this, but then they're still disappointed when their actions don't line up with the goals. So we really have to adjust that goal. Like you said, sometimes it's your actions that need to change, but sometimes it is actually the goal itself that has to change. And being okay and recognizing that also that can change again, right? Like in a year, we could have this conversation again. You're like, you know what? That was what I needed to do that whole year and the following. And now I'm in a totally different place, or I have this goal, or I want to work toward. That's what like evolving as a person is all about, and like changing goals. And like, we're allowed to change goals, but you have to say, okay, like, being realistic. If I change this goal, here's the work that I need to put in for probably this amount of time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think a huge part of that is recognizing that if you make that choice to not chase what you've always gone after, like for me, that's always been improving my physique, improving my fitness. I always wanted to be better, stronger, fitter. When I made the choice to not make that my focus anymore, I also had to accept that doesn't make me any less valuable, any less worthy, any less anything, just because it's just different. And that's a huge pain point, I think, for people, is that, well, if I don't look the way I once looked, if I don't have that same identity that everyone knew me as, then I'm not good enough. Who am I? Who am I? And that's a whole, Lauren and I get into these spiritual talks all the time.
We should just next podcast. We know what we're talking about.
We'll go into identity, but all of those, everything that you identify with can be gone in a second. Like being a parent, one day he's not going to need me the way he once did. And so if I tie myself up in being a mom only, then again, who am I when that's over? Who am I when being a physique athlete? Who am I when my youth is gone? All those things, like, who am I? And so recognizing that is not who I am. I am something completely separate to that. I am my higher self. We're not going to get into that, but I am separate to that. And that is a very, very, very difficult thing to accept. And so for me, some things that have helped me to detach from that very specific goal, because I think another thing with that is it's measurable. How much closer am I to the stage? How many weeks out am I? How much weight have I lost this past week? What are my inches? Very measurable, just like when we're in school. What's my grade? What's my GPA? Things that we can get validation of. I'm doing the right things. When your goal switches to a vague goal, like having a healthier relationship with food, having healthier habits, it's like, well, what did today look like? I don't, it's super vague. And sometimes you may even gain weight. You may even look worse than you once did initially. That's hard to manage, and it's hard to measure. So what I've been doing is I've been keeping a habit tracker, and I leave it up on my computer. It's literally just a checklist, and I got it off of Huberman's podcast of trying to, and we talked about this on a YouTube video. I can attach this in the show notes too, but I have 6 things I aim to do each day. And my goal is just to do 4 of them, because again, I know my days aren't going to be perfect. And so they suggest building in that room for failure, which there are most days I only do get 4 in, but that's okay. That's the goal. And so I try to get 4 of 6 things in every day. And I just check them off as I go. And then, or the next day, whatever. And then also I have stopped weighing myself, because that's not productive right now. I do keep an eye on like how my clothes are fitting, and that helps me to be like, oh, maybe I need to like not do this as much. But I can also see that on my checklist of like, oh yeah, you've not been getting your micros like you should, or you haven't been drinking your water like you should. But I've stopped weighing myself. That's been a huge thing. And I focused again more on actions than outcomes. So getting in my lifts, doing my habits, and just focusing on those things. And then also working on myself in other capacities. So the habits is a way that I work on myself, and I work on improving my everything. But then I also do a lot more self-development stuff like journaling and reading and things like that make me feel like I'm again moving myself forward, even though it's not the way that I once did. So those are some big things that have been really helpful. And if you guys are interested in the habit tracker that I have, you can DM us on Instagram or email us in the link in the show notes, and I can send that to you, because it's been really, really helpful.
Yeah. And I think that's that's another thing. Okay. Like, what is the end goal? Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that recognizing that the end goal, it can be vague, right? But how do I break this down in a way that isn't so vague? Because if it's too vague, you're not going to work towards it. You know what I mean? You do have to have structure and be specific and all that, but it can be in a different way than you were maybe used to. You know what I mean? If training to you was only if you could lift more weights, or do more volume or go heavy or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. That's the only thing that you're getting out of training. Well, when you take that away, you're kind of like, well, what do I do now? Like, do I not follow a training program? No, of course not. You still train, but like it can look different, right? So like for me, when I switched basically from saying, okay, like I am going to focus mostly on my physique when it comes to training and eating. And now my main focus is like focus and productivity. Like that's what I train, like my training and eating and my habits revolve around me being the most productive version of myself so that I can work in a lot of different capacities on the business. Mm-hmm. That is much more vague in terms of how I look and my actions, but I've chosen actions and behaviors that line up with those things that I know make me feel better and are more productive and more focused and allow me to do these other things. Is that going to 110% maximize muscle hypertrophy? No, it's not. You know what I mean? Like it hasn't. That's hence why I have less muscle. You know what I mean? But I've accepted that, right? Like that's okay. Is this maximizing how lean it could be? No, because I know that at some point getting too lean is going to take away from my focus and productivity. So there has to be that sweet spot. And I think it's when you have a vague goal, it's okay though to still break it down, like you said, in a really nice way. Like you have this more vague goal, which is kind of hard to adjust to, but you're still allowed to bake in different habits and behaviors that are specific. And the whole goal of all of this is to have your nutrition and training complement your life and not be for whatever goal that it might be. And if the goal is performance or physique, well then yeah, that shit's gonna be pretty dialed in. But if outside of that, you know what I mean? If you were like, yeah, I want to like feel good, be healthy, like look good, feel strong, but like have these other things too, well then that's going to look very different. So I think that it's having that realistic conversation with yourself about, what do I want to be doing? What do I want to be working towards? Like actually realistically right now, and like really assess like, was like my old goals and all of that, like, are those no longer serving my life? Maybe I need to adjust them. Yeah. So I think that just, again, having that realistic conversation is probably one of the most important things, and just really sitting down and like writing all those things out. And I think a lot of people can feel bad about making those shifts, but there's nothing to feel bad about.
Yeah, and you have to remember at the end of the day, like you're the one who has to live with you, and like you have to do what's best for you in the long run. People might have a preconceived idea of who you are. So what? They don't know you. They don't know your day-to-day life. You are the one who has to live with you. And so like for me, I mean, maybe I don't look as lean as I once did. I really don't care right now, because right now that's not my priority. Will it be again one day? Maybe. I might want to do that again, I probably will, because I enjoy that push. But right now I know that I don't have the capacity or the desire to do it. And so it'd be silly for me to act like I want to. And because it's just not going to happen. If I don't want it to some degree, and I don't really love that sentiment of like, you just want it more. But there is something to be said about, if you don't want what you say you want, you're not going to get there. So for me, I don't want it right now, and that's okay. But and that a huge part of that is getting over the fact that what you think other people should, what other people think you should want,
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a whole different can of worms, like overlaying other people's expectations onto yourself, which,
Oh yeah.
oof,
Should that be a podcast?
that should probably definitely be a podcast. Be like, Rick, we need some help here. Oh, we need to dive into this one.
That'd be a good one.
That is definitely a struggle, and people deal with that in a lot of different capacities. And I mean, obviously, again, like, you are an individual who's living around other individuals, so you don't just get to do whatever the fuck you want whenever you want, because that would be incredibly selfish. But there is a difference of living for someone else's expectation that's not even yours. That's very, very different.
Yes.
So again, probably another we had a lot of topics that came out of this one. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We will link some of the stuff that Sam talked about in the show notes. That tongue tied podcast, if you guys are just interested in hearing more about that, we'll put that below. What else? There was we did a really great pelvic floor podcast for anybody who is a new mom or somebody who is just maybe dealing with kind of some pelvic floor issues. Did a really great podcast with my friend Taylor Summers, who's a PT. So we went through a lot of different stuff there. I feel like we'll link all the stuff that we talked about in here.
We have a training postpartum with Danny.
Yes, we did that. There's a lot of really great resources that we can combine here in the show notes. If you guys are interested in coaching, you can visit our website, teamlocofit.com, and you'll get connected with a coach to start working towards your goals. And then last but not least, super exciting, first time I'm officially announcing this, we will be having an app come out in the next few months. Drum roll. So if you want to be the first to hear about that, you can also visit our website and sign up for our newsletter. Everybody will hear about that first there, and more details will come out as the date is approaching. But so excited, you guys. Like, this is something I've been wanting to do for a while, but wasn't really sure how to materialize it. And this is going to be absolutely everything that I wanted for it. So stay tuned.
Yay.
So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.